Hey there guys, it's Salis, and today I have the pleasure of announcing to the YouTuberverse, Jazzpunk. I'm bad at this. Jazzpunk is a comedy game, and yes, that is the best genre I can find to describe it, brought to us by Necrophone Games and published by the good folks over at Adult Swim, who have previously brought us such quirky titles as Fist Puncher and Volgar the Viking. And you know what? Say what you want about games with misleading trailers, I was all set up for a serious spy and espionage game, but what I was treated to was best described as a voyage to Trip Out City aboard the HMS Wacky. Jazzpunk uses a highly stylized design throughout, and I've heard people praising it for being so unique, but throughout my playthrough I couldn't shake the thought that this was a bit like Gravity Bone and 30 Flights of Loving. But that's not a bad thing. A game doesn't need truly unique style, using shapes and colours never before perceived by human eyes to be good. And in the case of Jazzpunk, the simple shapes and bright colours used in the game allowed them to create character within the people in the game. Going back to the character design though, each character is a rough outline of a humanoid form. So they kind of look like what first generation humanoid robots would look like, and it allows for some very funny jokes later on. And it even manages to hide the people you can interact with, because even some of the NPCs who are basically just a moving shadow wearing a white tie have some fun things you can do with them, including turning them into flies and removing their brain with a Q-tip, as well as funny dialogue lines throughout. Each level in Jazzpunk has a truly unique theme, such as the level set in Japan, and the one in a holiday resort, and even one inside a computerized world with some very grumpy bits. It's really hard to find anything wrong with the design in this game, so let's move on to sound. The music used in Jazzpunk is, as you would expect, a collection of jazz loops, and quite frankly I would have appreciated some punk loops, but they're not in there. And ordinarily, these repeating music cues would be annoying as hell, but in Jazzpunk they seem to get around this problem because the game is so crammed full of jokes and references and other hilarious moments that the player's attention is distracted from the background noise, and in the case of me, they were too busy laughing so hard they could feel a lung coming up that they didn't notice any sounds other than their own laughter, at least for a while. Sound effects used throughout the game are just as quirky. Some seem to take their sound from real-world situations like smoking and sifting through the garbage, and other sounds seem inspired from 80s sci-fi and 50s B-movie sounds. And it's this melding of different styles combined with the interesting choices made with the voice acting, it just adds more and more of that humour, like me at open bar. And speaking of that voice acting, each voice in this game sounds very robotic in keeping with the theme, but robotic does in no way mean monotone and the same. You see, just like the robots in Futurama, each robotically voiced character has their own unique brand of robotic, in both tone, accent, and inflection. And yes, I know some of the voice acting was provided by Jim Sterling, he of Escapist fame, so I suppose I had to mention that. Between the music and quirky sound effect choices and hilarious voice acting, the sound goes a great way to making the gameplay much more fun. And speaking of the gameplay, this is the first time I've ever had to give any aspect of one of my reviews a question mark out of 3 teabags. Because what gameplay am I supposed to review? Jazzpunk manages to cram other gameplay aspects in so many different places that to judge the game on its gameplay alone would take a couple of centuries. Some of the games it manages to do homage to include Frogger, Space Invaders, Street Fighter, Fruit Ninja, and Quake, to name a few. It even manages to reference Virtual Boy, and I can safely say that it is an accurate replica of the eye strain-o headaches one would expect from playing a Virtual Boy game. But the actual gameplay of Jazzpunk itself is just as satisfying. Played in a first-person view, you do get immersed into a world based on augmented reality vision. Although, considering you need to take drugs to start each mission, it could just be a basement filled with rats and garbage for all we know. The meat of the game relies on compelling yet simplistic puzzles in order to access the next area. And normally the simplicity of puzzles in a game would be a down point. But that's not why you play Jazzpunk. For the main objective of each level isn't the mission. It's finding all the jokes, minigames, and references therein. And if you do that, it is so rewarding, you might just forget what you actually need to do to finish the level. I'll admit myself, I played the Quake minigame for about 2 hours. But as with any first-person puzzle game, it just comes down to finding the right thing to use your held item on. Or in the case of most of the items in this game, find the wrong thing to use it on first because it's usually funnier. But eventually you will have to complete the objective to continue on to the next part of the story.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
The story itself takes place during an alternative Cold War in a world where everyone and everything is a robot. And you are a human wearing the shell of one of these robots, if the intro sequence is anything to go by, called Polly Blank, who throughout the game says nothing, probably because his or her human speech pattern would give him or her away. Although some of the robots seem completely aware of what you are, but don't really care. You're working for a secret government espionage service and sent on missions for your country, which require taking all of the drugs to enter, and each of these missions seems to take the form of a fantastical journey through the world of pop culture, separated by moments of sublime serenity, such as feeding fish at a pond or meditating at a Buddhist temple. But despite all your inner peace, your world grows ever more sinister when you meet the editor, who becomes the primary bad guy purely because he's a bit of a dick. Which, by the way, is the best character motivation ever. I would be far more inclined to believe the bad guy is the bad guy just because he's a dick, rather than any complicated backstory in any other triple game ever. Basically, he abducts your boss and his sexy secretary, and it soon becomes priority one to rescue them. And when you do, I'm not going to spoil it, but imagine you're happily watching Scooby-Doo when your cat or neighbour or random rat jumps up onto the remote and changes the channel over to When Animals Attack. Yeah, the ending comes, like most of the jokes, right out of left field and beans you square between the eyes, leaving you with only two questions. What the fuck was that, and can I do it again? The controls for this game is where I start to have issue with it. You see, it's a PC game, but all the controls are laid out for a 360 pad. You can play with keyboard and mouse, but it's a lot of trial and error, and you're constantly going to see prompts floating in your augmented reality vision, like press A to sit down, when in fact it's E on the keyboard. And I think it's time to address and correct a complaint made by some players that they feel the character moves like they're either sliding along or moving around on wheels, to which I say they're robots, of course they are. But when it comes to how this game handles, I only experienced a couple of bugs and crashes and very funny glitches. I think I saw about 2 of these glitches, one of which left an NPC standing in mid-air off the side of a building, and then a bridge was built through her face. This is funny, and it's so funny you have to do a double take because it might just be another joke in the game. I later found out it was not. Unfortunately, replay value in Jazzpunk, outside of the initial WTF moment, is practically non-existent. You see, it's very easy to find all the references and jokes in a single playthrough. And this game isn't even that long. You can beat it in 2 to 3 hours. Don't get me wrong, that was great if you got to produce a review and put it out. But for £12 or your regional equivalent, that's its full price, not the current 20% off £9.59 or your regional equivalent. Asking £4 an hour might not be enough for some people. If you want to get replay value from Jazzpunk, I suggest play the first game doing missions only, mission objectives only. Then do another playthrough to get all the jokes, minigames and references in the game. So, in conclusion, Jazzpunk is a hilarious mix of colourful and quirky that keeps you laughing for the entire game, and despite its brevity is a wonderful moment of fun. I think you need to think of Jazzpunk as a packet of delicious fruit pastels, as opposed to the massive slog that is Christmas dinner. It doesn't last very long, but oh god, is it so good while it's there. So, despite a few minor issues and a few glitches, I give Jazzpunk a solid 9 out of 10. Thank you for watching my review of Jazzpunk. Remember to like it, favourite it, comment, subscribe and share it. I've been Salis, this has been Jazzpunk, and I will see you next time.